Hey everyone, Gill Gross here, and it is time for another mailbag where I answer your hot takes, your observations, your questions, and ultimately your comments about tennis or anything else. Over 24 hours ago, I posted on the YouTube community tab, comment section popping off yet again. Over 100 comments, a lot of likes as well. So thank you to everyone, not only who left a comment, but also everybody who likes the messages, because that makes it pretty easy for me to choose which ones I should include in the mailbag. I noticed that this week, a lot of Alcaraz questions. It's going to be going to make up a large portion of the mailbag this week, as not only were there a lot of different, unique questions about Carlos Alcaraz after his loss to Grigor Dimitrov, but they all got a lot of likes. All right, recording this prior to the Shanghai semis. We got Hurkacz Korda, we got Dimitrov Rublev, so big opportunity for all of those guys. Not stunning, not the big guns, obviously. I mean, Rublev's the only top 10 player there, but also a lot of players who make sense in that spot, right? Hurkacz, it's a hardcourt Masters 1000. He's shown the ability to do this in the past. Korda, it's got a top 10 level in him. We saw that in January. Got an injury, obviously kind of derailed his season, but he's been kind of building up to this in the last couple weeks. Not a shocker to see him in this spot. And Dimitrov, we've talked a lot about his consistency all year long, the fact that he's had probably his best season since 2017. Well, the one thing that was kind of missing from him was the big win that would allow him to go deeper in one of these big events. And he gets that big win over Carlos Alcaraz. We're going to talk about it. In fact, it is the first comment coming from Nathan. Hi, Gil. I think a lot of us would appreciate a breakdown of the Alcaraz Dimitrov match. All right. So I'm going to throw a couple of different thoughts your way about the Alcaraz Dimitrov match, which Dimitrov won in 3 sets after dropping the first. I thought this was an absolutely stunningly good performance from Grigor. It was supremely good. There's not a single area of his game that wasn't impressive. He served great. His forehand was as damaging as it was consistent. On the backhand side, he had the slice going and he had the drive going, and it was rock solid. He was not missing backhands in this match, and we'll talk about the slice and how he used that. And the movement, that's the one part of his game that is always kind of ever present. Unless he's injured, Grigor is moving well. So, man, he put it all together. And this was as well as I've ever seen him play, quite frankly. You look at the second set, you look at the 2 points, the 2 sets that Dimitrov had to win to beat Alcaraz here. Second set, he makes 3 unforced errors and makes 80% of his first serves. Third set was 1 break. That was the difference in the third set. And you look at the return game that Grigor played. You take a close look at that, you'll see that there's not all that much Alcaraz could have done other than, missing the kind of easy first volley when he served and volleyed on break point. It was a backhand volley. There were a couple of spots for Alcaraz where he missed some easy volleys, which you don't usually see. But the forehand that Dimitrov came up with at 30 all was special stuff from the Dimitrov forehand. Just taking a pretty big risk, and it pays off because the control that he had over that wing all match long was just pinpoint. So I thought most of the credit, just if you ask me how did I feel about both players' levels, I thought it was more about Dimitrov. More about Dimitrov playing as well as he possibly could and reaching a pretty supreme level of play. It was a trend-breaking win. Sometimes we see a top player lose and we start talking about the matchup. We start looking at reasons why the upsetter has a certain style or certain attributes that might bother Alcaraz more than others. This isn't really the case for Dimitrov. He lost pretty decisively to Alcaraz twice this season. You look at some of the trends, Alcaraz versus one-handers, 22-1 before the Dimitrov match. A win percentage over 90% against one-handed backhands at the ATP level for his career coming into this match. You look at players who slice their backhands, like high-frequency slice guys, and it's hard to really find instances of Alcaraz losses to players of that nature. In 2023, players who have beaten Alcaraz: Norrie, Sinner, Marozsan, Djokovic, Paul, and Medvedev. You do not have a lot of slice. Slice backhand players in there. And you look at the year before. I looked through that. I'm not going to read off the names, but you kind of got to go back to Berrettini at the Australian Open until you see a name. It's like, oh, that's a guy who uses the slice a lot. Because traditionally, I've seen Alcaraz as a player who's super, super difficult to slice against because of his runaround footwork, because of his racket head acceleration on the forehand, because of his RPMs on the forehand. As a result of that, his ability to generate pace and spin off of slower balls. But Dimitrov's slice was staying really low, coming through the court quick, and he was going down the line a lot. Alcaraz was hitting a lot of forehands on the run from low contact points. Then he has to lift up on his forehand instead of really getting it through the court. And ultimately, like, what is the backhand slice? Now, yes, you could point to a lot of points. You can point to a lot of instances where Dimitrov's slice went into a Carlos Alcaraz error. In fact, if you look at the game in the third set when Grigor broke, I believe there are two instances of that. Yep, there's the first point of that 1-1 game in the third set where, again, Dimitrov used his backhand slice down the line. I don't think it's good to get predictable cross-court on the backhand slice against Alcaraz. He used it down the line, and it stayed so low that Alcaraz hit a forehand slice back, and he floated it long. And then at 15-all, Dimitrov played a terrific dictating point. He had Alcaraz on a string, on the move the whole time, and Carlitos did great running to just stay at neutral and hang in and hang in and hang in. But ultimately, Dimitrov backhand slice cross court, and Alcaraz, probably with tired legs and just an overall level of fatigue, shanked a runaround forehand off of Dimitrov's slice. So that's two errors off of slice backhands. And there were instances of that, but ultimately, the slice backhand is a setup shot. It's a setup shot for power. And it's not that Dimitrov was winning points outright off his slice all that often, but it was keeping Alcaraz on the move. It was disrupting his contact points. It was not allowing him, at the very least, not allowing him to find a ball to attack. And Dimitrov, behind his slice, with the aggressive forehands, with the big drive backhands, all of those were on the money and firing on all cylinders. Another pattern that's emerged for Alcaraz, second set issues. Last three losses, extended first sets. Two of them he won, one of them he lost. But when I say extended first set, we're talking about tie breaks, or in this case, we're talking about a 7-5. So close first sets followed by bad second set starts by Alcaraz. That's his last three losses. Medvedev, tiebreak first set, lost the second 6-1. Sinner, tiebreak first set, lost the second set 6-1. Today, or rather, not today, Shanghai against Dimitrov here, 7-5 first set, where Grigor actually served for it at 5-4 and was broken. Gets off to a bad start in the second, loses at 6-2. Broken right away. There has been a focus issue, which is what I was saying kind of going into this post-US Open swing when asked about, well, how do you feel about, what do you think about how Alcaraz is going to do? And my response was, I've seen some focus issues throughout the summer. I suspect that those could get worse in the fall when there are a little bit, more kind of season-long fatigue and some lower stakes. So I don't know. Did Alcaraz win the first set, get a little bit too comfortable, lose the focus at the start of the second? I mean, the pattern would suggest that he is not doing a good job maintaining his intensity from the end of the first set to the start of the second set. 3 losses in a row here. Dimitrov's serve strategy was interesting. I actually have screenshots here, I believe. Here is, well, do I have it? Okay, here's what he did on the ad. Mostly going out wide, 64% out wide. Here's what he did on the deuce, 65% out wide. And on the deuce side, it was clearly a terrific strategy. Look at the breakdown here of points won, points lost. On the ad side, if I factor in the aces, it is 7 points won, 6 points lost. And this is on the first serve, mind you. So you should be winning most of the points. And when he went T on the deuce, he was not winning most of the points. When he went wide on the deuce, great success. 19 points won, 5 points lost. Now, if we look at the ad side, his strategy of going wide very, very often was not as successful, with a breakdown of 10 points won versus 6 points lost. And then when he went T on the first serve, he won every single point on the ad. So how do we interpret this? Dimitrov went wide on both sides. It worked extremely well on the deuce. On the ad side, it was not as effective. It was more effective going T. That's Alcaraz's forehand return. So look at the performance of Alcaraz's forehand return. If you kind of break it down, he loses all 8 points on the ad side, and he loses 19-5 on the deuce side, returning the first serve on his forehand. That's interesting. That's a good strategy from Dimitrov. Overall, it felt like Alcaraz just couldn't really play from the middle throughout the match because Grigor was so on top of points, just controlling the middle of the court much more often, and Alcaraz was playing a lot on the run because Grigor had such terrific control, such great change of directions, such great mixing of not only sideline to sideline and, using the width of the court, but also mixing up the paces and the spins as he does very well, particularly on his backhand. Alcaraz was not playing from the middle, it didn't feel like. Could not set his feet and play offensive tennis from the middle of the court like he wants to. And this is the kind of thing that wouldn't happen as much if his serve were better and his return performed better against Dimitrov's serve. A lot of that is how the points are started in the serve-return dynamics, is all I'll say. But I think a lot of credit to Dimitrov. He was exceptional in this match, as I said at the start. All right? So those are my thoughts on Alcaraz's loss. And now we'll get into more big picture stuff with Alcaraz. This next comment got 38 likes. What's your take on Alcaraz post-Wimbledon? He's definitely struggling on hard courts this year compared to last. It's such a big picture question that it's hard for me to know exactly where to go here. But look, I think this wasn't as much of a problem in the Dimitrov match. But I think his forehand went a little bit cold on him after Wimbledon. There is a mental adjustment that I think, needs to be made once again. And, we talk about this with players who achieve really, really big things and, have these big breakthrough results. There is often a hangover as a result of something like that happening. Now, yes, Alcaraz had already won a major. Yes, Alcaraz already had a year-end number one. He had spent many, many weeks at number one. He had become used to kind of having that target on his back and, being a front runner week to week to week, being a contender to win big titles week to week to week. But I don't know, like beating Djokovic in a 5-set Wimbledon final is kind of another level. And stuff might have changed a little bit in his head after that match, and he needs to get used to that. Again, I've seen a lot of focus issues for Alcaraz. I would not give him high marks in focus, which is such a big thing mentally for tennis players. It's such an important attribute. It is under-discussed. And, you could say, Gill, how do you know that it's focus and not just he started playing worse? And my response to that, or the way I would explain that, is when the scoreboard suggests that you have reached a moment in a match where there could be a loss of focus, and time again, Alcaraz responds with a dip in his level, that is how I get to the conclusion that Alcaraz has been having focus issues in his matches, right? When he has built, okay, like an example, in Cincinnati, he's up 5-2 against Hurkacz in the third set and completely just gets sloppy. Or he's up a set and a break against a Djokovic who is not doing well physically, and he throws in a terrible game at 4-2, I believe it was, in the second. Focus. Like, that's just kind of getting into a mode of cruise control and just not maintaining your intensity in that spot up a set and a break. That's what that is. There are numerous examples, right? Even in the Zverev match at the U.S. Open, like, he played his worst set in the third set when he was up 2-0. By far, his level dipped there. So I've just seen it a lot. And then obviously in this match against Dimitrov, start of the second set, we've talked about the start of the second set issues that have been consistent. So when the scoreboard suggests, okay, here's a spot where you might have issues keeping up your mental and physical intensity, and then Alcaraz responds with inconsistencies, that's why, that's where I feel like there are focus issues. I also think that another part of this is recognizing that the expectations are so high for Alcaraz that he can play some pretty decent, pretty high-level tennis, and it can still feel disappointing. Well, that has certainly been the case since Wimbledon, right? You look at a final in Cincinnati, a semi at the U.S. Open, a semi in Beijing. The only pre-semifinal defeats that Alcaraz has suffered since Wimbledon are to Tommy Paul in Canada and to Grigor Dimitrov in Shanghai. Two elite athletes, two players who on hard court, I mean, for Tommy Paul, he's never been a top 10 player, but I think on hard court, he's capable of that top 10 level. And Dimitrov is a former top 10er who is playing terrific tennis, and we'll see what he does rest of the way in Shanghai. He's in the semis. So, lost to Djokovic, lost to Medvedev, lost to Sinner. So, perspective here, right? Perspective. The expectations for Alcaraz are through the roof. Has he kept up what he did in the first half of the season? No, he has not. Has he kept up what he was doing, Wimbledon? I don't know what the breakdown was after he won Wimbledon, but I believe he had won the majority of tournaments that he had played for the season. I believe that to be the case. Should we see that? Okay, let's do that right now. Real quick, and then I want to move on to the next question. So we'll start in Buenos Aires. So he wins in Argentina, that's 1 of 1. Loses in Rio, 1 of 2. Wins Indian Wells, 2 of 3. Loses Miami, that's 2 of 4. Wins Barcelona, that's 3 of 5. Wins Madrid, that is 4 out of 6. Loses Rome, that's 4 out of 7. Loses Roland Garros, that's 4 out of 8. Wins Queens, that's 5 out of 9. And wins Wimbledon, that is 6 out of 10. So that is the case. the majority of tournaments that Carlos Alcaraz played from his start of the season to Wimbledon, the majority of his main draws, he won the title. And that's why it feels like this big downturn because he hasn't won a title since Wimbledon. In reality, he's had a pretty solid stretch of tennis by almost any player's standards. It feels like it's been disappointing because of the expectation that at 20 years old, Alcaraz has set. Perspective. Next one's from our friend Dimitri. Hi, Gill. Somewhat enjoy your content. That's heartening. I'm heartened by that. I'm going to stay away from controversial topics this time. Bit of a personal question. Do you enjoy being an analyst/commentator more than being a fan? You mentioned in the past you'll never have an affinity for another player like you had for Ferrer, simply because this is your job now, and being objective is key when performing analysis. Do you miss experiencing emotions, good and bad, and come with rooting for a particular player? Do you really believe that no other player will be able to tickle your fancy enough to become their fan? Would love your thoughts. Love, Dimitri. Oh, great comment, Dimitri. Great comment. Good question. Look, like at the end of the day, I feel so lucky to be doing this and I don't know. I've always been someone who loves to make opinions in my head, share opinions, talk the sport. What could be better than this? You know? So I wouldn't really trade this for anything. I wouldn't trade this for the feeling that I got, when Ferrer beat Tsonga at Roland Garros to make his first major final. No, I wouldn't trade that for this. And I also still get to be a fan in other aspects of my life, right? Like when I'm watching the New York Rangers, I get plenty, my hockey team, I get plenty of the sensations of being miserable after losses and being ecstatic after wins. Yeah, I don't get that in tennis anymore. Sometimes when I'm watching a match, I'll be honest, like sometimes it does feel like work, especially when I'm not watching live because I had to miss a match and I have to watch a replay. But for the most part, this is the best. And yeah, I get such enjoyment out of engaging with the sport in this way. And it's not only fun, but extremely rewarding. And at the end of the day, it's the best thing I could ask for. All right, next one is from Mr. Oh, and then I guess the other question was, will a player ever like tickle my fancy enough for me to become their fan? No, like if you're not looking for that to happen, it won't happen. And there's just, I don't know, there's a certain emotional, an emotional disconnect that creates almost a force field that I have right now when I am watching and engaging with the sport. It just won't allow me to really ever get to that point where there's someone who I'm just going to become like a fan of. And it would kind of compromise my ability and my trust, because at the end of the day, nobody is really going to have complete faith in what I'm saying if they believe that I have like a strong emotional connection to an individual player. Although, I mean, some people will think I do anyway, and that's there's nothing I can do about that. All right, next one's from Mr. Black Global. As the season comes to an end, the controversy over the tennis balls has intensified. Fritz threw his hat in when Medvedev said the Shanghai courts were too slow. Fritz's counter was the real issue were the balls. Recently, even Novak applied pressure on the ATP. His statement was lengthy, this part being the most interesting. Quote, however, we simply have to find a way to unify so that each category of the ATP Tour, we have one ball to play with depending on the surface. Sometimes that change of balls happens 3 times in 3 weeks, depending on where we play, and it affects the health of the players and the joints themselves. In that sense, I support the players complaining and asking the ATP to find a way to resolve it. They have to find a solution. So, Gill, How do you think this will all play out? Well, I've noticed all year long that the players have been complaining about the balls all year long. Like literally starting at the Australian Open, where it was a big topic, and we did see a lot of injuries. And Daniil Medvedev was someone who voiced his concern. But it's been all year, and like I haven't gone back and done the research to give you a list of players, but man, like it's a lot. It really is a lot, and it's not just one brand. It's been Wilson, it's been Dunlop, it's been different events. So, it's impossible to pick on one manufacturer or one tournament because, again, all year. It's been frustrating because the information out there is limited. It's kind of something that happens to an extent behind closed doors. And it's hard to know what to say about this other than figure it out. And by the way, a lot of players have said that COVID was kind of the turning point here. Like that everything was fine until COVID. And since COVID, not just that the changing of the balls are a problem, right? Because that's been happening forever. Week to week to week, they change balls. But the quality of the balls are suddenly under a microscope where players week to week are saying, these balls are hurting my arm. These balls are not maintaining integrity through the ball change. By the end, they're heavy, they're fluffy, they're impossible to hit through the court. These are the things that we're hearing. Obviously, what complicates this issue is capitalism. The fact that tournaments will make deals with manufacturers to use their tennis balls. And, it's obviously a marketing play and a sponsorship play. Here's my idea. Here's the one thing I want to throw out here. With rackets and strings, we have players all the time using a certain racket and putting a cosmetic on it for marketing purposes. For example, like you'll have players using rackets that were manufactured or kind of developed in 2015 and are no longer being sold to the public. But they like that racket. They're still using that racket. So what the manufacturers will do was, okay, that's fine. You can keep using that. Obviously, you can keep using that. We're going to keep making that racket for you. But we are going to paint it like the brand new Wilson Clash or the brand, right? Like the brand new Jannik E10, right? Like that's how they will do it. Can we do that for balls? Can the ATP make a standardized tennis ball that is of the highest quality, that is popular amongst the players? Now, I think getting to that point would be a process in itself. But could you standardize the ball and allow the tournaments to make the exact same deals that they're making with the manufacturers? And ultimately, you just put a stencil and a cosmetic or a paint job on the ball that aligns with whatever kind of marketing deal that tournament has struck. That is the solution that I can come up with right now, and I can use this platform to kind of throw out there into the open. I don't know. Tough. I do hope that this whole thing gets resolved, though, because it's frustrating to hear that the players are not happy with the balls that they're having to play with, because that's not what we want, especially when it comes to injuries. A lot of players talking about injuries coming into play as a result of poor quality tennis balls. Next one is from James Smith. Hey, Gil, what are your thoughts on the Alcaraz fear factor being largely negated at this point of the season anyway? Lots of players know they can beat him now, and it shows. The drop shot also looks more predictable, and rally tolerance is not amazing. I don't know about the fear factor thing. I mean, at the end of the day, it's not Joe Schmo is beating him. Again, I think the worst losses he's taken since Wimbledon is Dimitrov and Tommy Paul. Like, these are not exactly, these are not exactly like, if I'm 45 in the world playing him in the first round, I'm going to be like, yeah, I can do this because that guy did it. Like there's no Marozsan losses happening on a regular basis here. So I think I don't know if I quite subscribe to the idea that these results have sent kind of a signal through the locker room that Alcaraz is there for the taking, that you don't need to be able to play a top 10 level in order to beat Carlos Alcaraz. I still think you kind of do. Yeah, that's my only response to that. But at the same time, I acknowledge that, maybe there's not this crazy aura around Alcaraz right now, like maybe some of the best ever have had at their peaks. But, that's okay, right? Not a lot of players are able to sustain enough success where everybody is terrified of them. It happens from time to time. Certainly it happens. But it takes a lot of time, and it's okay if Alcaraz doesn't have that right now. Next one from JD Freeman. Hey, Gil, love the show. Who would win in an MMA cage fight, Medvedev or Kyrgios? Medvedev is feisty and has the length advantage, but Kyrgios has that dog in him. Medvedev wins in a cage fight. That lankiness is no joke. All right, that is a big advantage, especially if the fight stays on the feet, which I imagine it's going to stay on the feet. I don't think that either of them will be doing much wrestling or grappling in this MMA cage fight. And look, like, I know that Kyrgios in some ways has that hard exterior, but I don't know, he's more of a lover than a fighter in my eyes. And now I think in the buildup, like, the guy has some talent, Conor McGregor-esque, in terms of, building up the fight, right? Like, he's going to win the press conference is going to be, that would be great, all right? Which is part of the great thing about MMA and boxing in some cases as a sport is, you get that long buildup, right? Sometimes like 6 months of just waiting and the tension rising. That would be really good with these guys. But when it comes down to it, like, who do I think is really, tougher? Medvedev. And obviously Miami comes to mind. Daniil was very much ready to throw down, it seemed. He's just a small child. He does not know how to fight. All right. Next one is from Cineraptor. Was Sinner losing to Shelton a result of a deep run in Beijing? Or do you see Shelton as having the potential to be in that next tier with Sinner and Carlos? And this was just him flashing it once again. It's kind of in the middle for me. I would say it's more look, it's both. It's both. Because from the very start in Shanghai, it didn't seem like Sinner was quite as locked in or as dominant as he was in Beijing. Wasn't playing the level that he was playing in Beijing, whether it be the first round against Giron or the second round against Sebastian Baez. It didn't appear that Sinner was really maintaining that level. At the same time, Shelton had this unbelievable serving performance. It's the best I've ever seen him serve. And not only did he sustain that, if you look at the numbers throughout the match, and I'll give you those right now, you look at Shelton, 48% first serves unreturned, making 73% of his first serves in the match. And what if I go by set here? Can I go by set here? I don't have the proper page pulled up to do that. Let me do that. Because he lost the first set 6-2, and Sinner actually was getting the serve back. But second set, Shelton makes 74% of his first serves. Third set, he makes 83% of his first serves. And the third set was mostly the set that I had a chance to watch every point of. And second and third set, he's 50% or above first serves unreturned. So Sinner really just kind of wasn't able to get returns back. And then you look at what went down under pressure at the end of the match. 4-5 Awesome body serve by Shelton that completely jammed Sinner up. He had to give like a fry pan return. Easy sitter forehand put away on the +1 on top of the net. Now it's 5-all. 5-all, ad side, beautiful tee serve. Sinner makes a really good return, like a stretch stab return to float it back. Obviously, there's not much on it though. But Shelton with a delayed serve and volley. I don't think he planned to serve and volley. Maybe I'm misremembering, but I don't think he planned to serve and volley. I think that he saw Sinner on the stretch and just snuck in and then took a forehand swing volley out of the air to once again put the point away on the +1. And then at 5-6, match point for Shelton, Sinner misses his first serve, second serve into Shelton's forehand, and Ben absolutely rocked it to force the error. So, in a way, it's kind of, like Ben has the potential to be one of the most dominant, if not the most dominant server in the game at some point. And this was him serving at a 10 out of 10 level. And that's going to be tough to beat. From there, he just needs to hang in when it comes to baseline rallies. And he did a good job of doing that as well. He's extremely athletic. And that's what Ben Shelton's potential is all about. Like, you can be a huge server with a phenomenal forehand and a good mover. And that is why we talk about Ben Shelton as a guy who should be a top 10 player at some point and has the potential to be a top 5 or a potential to be someone who contends for big titles. But he has a long way to go at the same time. Next one from Vanessa. Hi, Gil. This might sound like a stupid question, but I was just wondering. This season, I have seen the statement, Alcaraz is going to win everything when Nole retires, a lot on social media. What's your take on this? Novak skipped Shanghai and Beijing, so Alcaraz was the favorite to win both tournaments, but unfortunately he lost. Based on these past tournaments, what do we say now about the future of tennis? Is it doomed if Alcaraz is not consistent like the big three was? I am asking this because after Wimbledon, a lot of people said that he saved tennis and is the future of the game. What happens if he does not win tournaments/slams consistently? There's a lot of things that I can pick apart here. A lot of directions I can go, but let me say this. Your opinion about Carlos Alcaraz and what he means for the sport should not have changed. Nobody's opinion should have changed from the end of Wimbledon to now. Nothing has happened from that period in time where you should be rethinking whatever you thought then, unless you were overreacting then, in which case it's still an overreaction. But whatever Carlos Alcaraz was then, he is still now. Nothing has changed. And certainly you look at him not winning Beijing, not winning Shanghai. Like, these are not things that should be changing your opinion about who Carlos Alcaraz is. It's also not something that should be changing your opinion on, this is not giving Alcaraz special treatment. You shouldn't be changing your opinion about almost any players, regardless of what they do, for a couple of tournaments at this time of year. Unless it's Holger Rune, who we had not seen anything like what he did, and then he did what he did, right? Obviously, the opinion about Holger is going to change a little bit post-US Open based on what he did in 2022. But even in that case, you are very, very prone to overreacting. Because, it's a general rule of thumb. And you will find yourself right much more often than not if you follow this rule of thumb. Do not change your opinion on tennis players after the US Open. Hold. And for Alcaraz, look, the reason why, Alcaraz is touted as someone who's going to be very important in the next decade plus in men's tennis is not because of what he did at Wimbledon. It's not. It's because of what he has shown throughout his entire career so far. It's about what he did in 2021. It's about what he did in 2022. It's about what he did in 2023 leading up to Wimbledon. Yes, Wimbledon was new grounds, new heights, but it's not like suddenly he wins that Wimbledon final and that was the realization about what Alcaraz can be for the sport for the next decade plus. It was already there. So the point is, here's what I'll say to this question. It's too reactive. All of the takes are too reactive there. And you'll get yourself into trouble kind of. I shouldn't say get yourself into trouble because it's fine if you're going to react, but you're going to get whiplash if your opinion on Alcaraz long-term is changing week to week to week. You're going to get whiplash, and there's no reason for that. All right, this one comes from Max Dang Vu. One thing you learned about each of the current ATP top 10 in 2023. Okay. I did not prepare answers for this, so this is going to be off the cuff. Number one, Novak Djokovic. Still moving like a 25-year-old. All right, number two, Carlos Alcaraz. Improved upon his year-end number one season in 2022. A better player, improved. Daniil Medvedev, still elite on hard court. 4, Jannik Sinner. Stronger physically and more skilled technically than he's ever been before. Continuing to get better every year. Holger Rune. Continues to be as talented as he is raw. Hard. He's the hardest guy. I mean, you've heard me all year, struggle to kind of figure out exactly how to analyze Rune and figure out exactly how he's going to play and all of that. All right, Stefanos Tsitsipas. Mental question marks are present. Andrei Rublev can win a big title. That's what we learned about him. Can win a big title. Taylor Fritz. What did we learn about Taylor Fritz? Can hold the top 10 position. Casper Ruud. Long-term question marks despite major finals. There's no guarantees with Ruud. Most guys who are 24 and have made 3 major finals, you know that they are going to win a major at some point. But Ruud's in that unique space where despite having those things on his resume, you just don't know if he's ever going to get there or not based on what we've seen this year. Zverev at number 10. On his way to making a full recovery. That's what we learned about Zverev. On his way to making a full recovery. Okay, next one from Tiago Mudkip. First of all, I want to say I really enjoy your content. Thank you. I'd like to know your thoughts on Alcaraz being so set on trying to get to year-end number one to the point of playing everywhere and making his life more difficult by being tired by the time of Paris and ATP finals come around. In my opinion, he's putting so much pressure at this point, both on his mind and legs. It's not healthy at this stage of his career. I recall Murray making a big push to number one, ended up backfiring the following year. Alcaraz's words after today's loss don't sound particularly healthy as well. Yeah, if you didn't see what Alcaraz said, he expressed disappointment in the fact that loss in Shanghai was going to make it a lot harder for him to finish year-end number one. And finishing year-end number one is something that he's been very open, even as far back as the U.S. Open. And I was in a press conference where we were talking about that, or he was talking about that. at the Open, just not mincing his words about his desire to finish this year number one. So this is a good question. The question is, one, about his scheduling, two, about his goal setting and the pressure that he's putting on himself. And at the end of the day, you have to figure out as a player, and as a 20-year-old, it would be very understandable if Alcaraz hasn't figured this out yet, but you have to figure out what puts you in the best mental headspace. Is that saying, come the U.S. Open, that you want to finish number one and seemingly constantly thinking about that as your goal? For most tennis players, that is going to be counterproductive. You're simply putting more pressure on yourself, and you're not staying as much in the moment as maybe you could. And for most players, it is not advisable. Now, for some, it may be. But Alcaraz needs to seriously, and Juan Carlos Ferrero as well, they need to seriously think about, is this the way to go mentally? To set a long-term goal, to be public about it, to constantly think about it. Is that really the way to go? Because obviously being number one, it's something that really takes care of itself. If you are able to just focus on winning the match in front of you, win the event in front of you, it takes care of itself. You win, it happens. You lose, it doesn't. So is that contributing to Alcaraz going titleless since Wimbledon? Could be. Because mentally, he's seemed a little bit on edge, not having quite as much fun, not smiling quite as much. Again, having the focus issues that I talked about early in the show. And in the case of the Sinner match, having some nerve management issues as well. So maybe it's not the best way to go. In terms of the scheduling, I'm a little bit less critical of that. I mean, he pulled out of Davis Cup, played the 500 in Beijing. Sure. I mean, so did most of the other top players. Is he going full Djokovic at this point or full big three at this point and being super selective? No. But I think he's being selective enough where I wouldn't say that he's made any egregious scheduling decisions. The only egregious scheduling decision that I think he's made this year was playing Hopman Cup after Wimbledon, especially considering the fact that it was on clay. To me, that made no sense, and that was a rest. That was an obvious point in the schedule where Alcaraz should have been resting, and he didn't. But other than that, I can't criticize his schedule. And at some point, I want to talk about this more, but Alcaraz has already said when it comes to his schedule that he's already said that he is not going to play any tournaments before the Australian Open. He is going to take a proper long offseason, which is music to my ears. And I think as it's worked out well for Alcaraz in the past, it's going to really help him in 2024. I'm going to do two more. This next one is from Malik. This is just my 2 cents on Alcaraz post-Wimbledon season, though it could be wrong. What do you think of this comment? He is basically going through exactly what Rafa went through throughout his career. He'd have an insane first half of the year and then drop out to come He'd have an insane first half of the year, then drop out come to Shanghai, Paris, and ATP finals, which could also help explain Nadal's complete lack of titles there. I believe that Carlos needs to shuffle his schedule a bit to allow room for this part of the year. I'd personally say he should keep the same schedule up to the clay season, but then skip Monte Carlo and Rome, and rather only do Madrid and RG. As for the grass season, I honestly believe he should only do Wimbledon. For the North American swing, he should only do Cincinnati and the US Open. After all, he should not be as fatigued as he usually is toward the end of the year, and it'll keep his longevity yearly and whole career-wise longer. Thanks for the intriguing feedback, Gill. All the best. Yeah, I would not agree with most of those suggestions, though. I will explain why. If you are going to, at the end of the day, you are saying Alcaraz needs to make adjustments so that he's better this time of year. And to that, I would say, why? This is the time of year that isn't as important because there's no major that you're working towards. So why is Shanghai more important than Rome. It's not. It's probably less important than Rome. In the rankings, it's not. Prize money, prestige, it's not. But in terms of like Alcaraz wanting to be at his best, if you ask him, do you want to be at your best, Rome or Shanghai? He's going to pick Rome. For grass season, he's at a stage where he's trying to get comfortable with the surface, right? So in 3-4 years from now, I'll agree with you. He should probably only play Wimbledon. I'll definitely agree with you. Maybe even 2 years from now. But for now, I think it's probably good to play Queens. It was certainly good to play Queens this year. We know how it played out. Probably was the thing that gave him the confidence to ultimately win Wimbledon. And then for the North American swing, it's the same thing. Maybe he should have skipped Canada this year. I think, given what he looked like in Canada, that argument becomes even stronger. But you see what I'm saying? Like, your comment suggests that he should be prioritizing this time of year, right? Where I get what you're saying in terms of career longevity. And yes, that is important. You need to make sure that you are not making any sacrifices in regards to how fatigued you are or how much wear and tear you are putting on your body in the long term. But if we're looking at how the calendar year plays out, there's no reason to prioritize this time of year if you're Carlos Alcaraz. I mean, look at the career that Rafa has had, as you've mentioned, not doing well after the US Open, basically ever. And, he still had the career that he's had. I'm sure Alcaraz would like to play well the whole year, but if there's one time of year where he's not going to play that well, this is the time. This is the time. From Sean, hi Gill, watching the content, love watching all the content you've put out this year. Appreciate you. In recent time with Ben Shelton's rise, I've seen people credit his relationship with his dad as a coach. Why does their dynamic work and get praised so much in comparison to the other father-son pairings such as Ruud, Zverev, and Tsitsipas? The first thing is, I guarantee you, if Ben has a period of stagnation in his mid-20s, like Tsitsipas, Zverev, and Ruud have had, and Bryan, his father, is still his coach, don't worry, it'll come. Just give it time. Like, I see a lot of that, criticism, I guess, from like the Tsitsipas or Ruud or Zverev fan base, but especially the Tsitsipas fan base. Like, oh, like, why are you focusing so much on Apostolos? Like, look at these other examples. They all get criticized. That's the nature of when the father is the coach and the stagnation comes in a spot, at an age or a period in someone's career where you're not really wanting stagnation, or in the case of some of these guys like Ruud, even regression. If that happens, the father-son thing is going to get brought up. It's going to get put under a microscope. That's just what happens. So when it comes to, Bryan, just give it time. Like, if the results suggest that there is some questioning to be had with Bryan Shelton, the questioning will happen. However, I also think that there are some things at play when it comes to Bryan and Ben that are unique from the other three, and that should be pointed out. It seems like Bryan Shelton is very, very much willing to not be Ben's coach. Very willing. Because when Ben first went on tour, Bryan wasn't the coach. It was Dean Goldfine. Like, the original plan was, I'm not going to coach you. You're going to go out with Dean Goldfine, and I'm not going to be your coach. And then midway through the year, it was not working out that well with Dean, not because Dean's not a great coach. He is. But they decided, maybe it's best that right now at this stage, that it's going to be Ben and Bryan together, father-son. Which I think especially makes sense as you're just coming into your own, just becoming an adult for the first time. Like, Ben went from high school kid or academy kid to college kid. Like, he hadn't really been an adult before until he went out on tour, traveling hotel to hotel. It's the first time he's gotten a taste of this life. I think it's good to have a good father figure present, or at least a good support group present as you go to do that. But in that sense, like the fact that Bryan wasn't the coach when they started, obviously it just seems like it doesn't seem like Bryan is going to be as clingy as some of the other coaches have been. Zverev has tried to bring outside people in. It hasn't worked. Tsitsipas, Stefanos has tried to bring outside people in. It hasn't worked. Ruud has never even tried to bring someone in. Ben has already had that setup where Bryan is not traveling and it's an outside coach. And I assume that 5 years from now, not I assume, but if I were a betting man, I would bet that Bryan Shelton is not Ben's coach in 5 years. Because I just don't think that's how they're going to roll. Or at least that he's not the only coach, that there's somebody else in there. And also Bryan, is a coach that has done a lot of things on his own, like separate from Ben. Like Bryan was a very successful coach at a large D1 university where players from not only the United States, but also internationally have come to be under his tutelage. And look, I'd be lying if I told you I had a really good handle on what Apostolos, Tsitsipas, and Alex Zverev Sr. and how am I forgetting Casper's father's name? Damn it, it's totally escaped my mind. Anyway, I'd be lying if I told you I had a great handle on what their resumes looked like before their sons became pro tennis players, but certainly it's not as publicly known, at least, as what Bryan has accomplished. I said this was the last one, but I know there's one comment. It's the next one that I pulled, and I know that there's going to be a lot of interest in it, so I will include it, and we'll end on this one. It's from Josep. What did you think about Novak's comments, Novak's response to Rafa yesterday? It seems like he was holding back his true thoughts. LOL. Well, he was maybe holding back his true thoughts. I mean, he said as much. What Novak said, and this goes back to Rafa's remarks that Novak would be frustrated if he didn't finish with the most slams. What Novak said is that his respect for Rafa Nadal supersedes any negative opinions he has about things that maybe he's done or he's said. Which essentially says, like, look, I am not... Oh, but he also made sure to add, of course I disagree. So he disagrees with what Rafa said about him, which we could have expected. But, he basically did something that, is classy, which is like, I'm not really going to get into a war. Oh my goodness. I'm not going to get into a war of words, and I'm just going to keep it very respectful and say I disagree and leave it at that. So, classy response by Novak, no doubt about that. But I also kind of want to follow up because somebody sent me Djokovic's response to a question that was asked, I think it was earlier this year, which was literally like, how would you have felt if you hadn't accomplished what you've accomplished, and maybe you had not been able to achieve your goals in the sport of passing Rafa and Roger? And what Novak said was interesting, and kind of credibly refutes what Rafa said. Novak was basically like, look, while I've had my lofty goals in the sport, I also am very aware of where I came from, and which is nothing, poor family, war-torn country, not a lot of history of not a ton of history of great champions in tennis in the past, but of course a little bit. So essentially it's like I have to have that perspective with me always. And at the end of the day, if I had won 2 majors or 5 majors, it would have ultimately been a success. Coming from nothing and ultimately needing to kind of dig my family out of poverty, right? Like that is really the perspective that Novak was ultimately coming from. So, in that sense, Djokovic refuted the idea that he was ever going to retire and be disappointed or frustrated in what he had accomplished, which makes a whole lot of sense, right? That'll do it for this mailbag. I will have Monday match analysis after the Shanghai final goes down. Talk to you then. Hope you enjoyed. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you next time.